Welcome back, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, it is my pleasure to be afforded the opportunity to make contributions to the estimates of revenue and expenditure for the 2024 budget. Madam President, I am guided by the strength and eternal mercies of the Almighty, and recognizes that everything is realized through His grace and His blessings. Madam President, it is my understanding that this year's budget is a continuation of an attempt by the government to achieve its transformational agenda that has been elusive thus far. Hence, I will make contributions based on pronouncements of achievements for 2023 and plans for 2024. The presentation of the 2024 budget, I believe, Madam President, is not really people-centered, but as proclaimed, but it is rather more self-centered, without true focus on those in need during this challenging time. Madam President, this 2024 budget debate is occurring at a time when the greater economy has shown clear signs of slowing. As it speaks specifically to the GDP proposed estimated figures of 3 to 3.6% over the next 2 years. Notwithstanding this analysis of the macroeconomic parameters, but it's not just these figures, Madam President, but what is really felt by families and homes around this country. I think that is what is most important. So the mention of glowing numbers, the mention of increased revenue, the question is, how does that impact ordinary people on a day-to-day basis? That is the core, and that is what a budget should represent. Some of the remarks from people in the street, Madam President. Things are slow. Money is tight. People are not spending. Nothing happening. The place real hard. It doesn't seem like we have a Christmas this year. Those are the feedback from ordinary people. And that is the facts. I am not saying, Madam President, that this administration is not intending. Their intentions might be good, but the question is, what does the result say? It is all our hope that these circumstances, these utterances, the way how people feel, will change for the benefit of this nation, and that this budget that will be implemented in the next fiscal cycle will really and truly impact people's life in a positive way. We hope that. We do not wish anything negative on our people. But the fact of the matter is, the situation out there is not as comfortable as it is proclaimed. And those are the facts. Madam President. Madam President, I want to focus on the main economic pillar that has been touted since the last budget presentation, and including this one, which is healthcare. This government has informed this nation that the most critical aspect of their transformation agenda is addressing healthcare. This government further went on to say in its 2023 budget statement, "For too long, Grenadians have made do with an inept system that has undervalued its healthcare professionals, underfunded critical health services to the detriment of many." Madam President, the government further went on to say, "Access to quality and affordable health care is a basic right that this administration intends to deliver to the people of Greater Carriacou and Petit-Martinique." That statement can be found on page 8 of the 2023 budget statement. Madam President, this government went on to further accuse the former New National Party administration of having absolutely no plan to develop the health sector. Madam President, this statement is incorrect. I am not aware if the Minister for Health is familiar with the strategic plan for the Ministry of Health, Strategic Plan 2016 to 2025. I encourage him, if he has not seen it, to make himself acquainted with such a document, as it is still relevant today, based on the strategic plans that are contained therein. So we had a plan, and we'll hear more some of the results of that plan, Madam President, as we move forward. Madam President, they said that facilities were ignored and our healthcare professionals were treated with disregard. And we hear today that nurses were fleeing in droves, and they did admit that some of them are still living. Critical services were not provided. Our citizens are still literally afraid to be committed to our hospital for care. Madam President, I do hope, as we speak here now in 2024, that this perception has changed. I really do hope. Madam President, today the calls are loud and clear that the nation is clearly not satisfied with the current services of our healthcare system, with specific focus on hospital and primary care services. If I might add, Madam President, it has been a dismal performance by this administration thus far, and this is very concerning to every Grenadian, including the opposition. Madam President, the reports, the stories are frightening and worrying. Reports of little or no basic and critical medications, including antibiotics, are not readily available for patients at our health centers and hospitals. Madam President, I take no pleasure in speaking about this. As a Grenadian, this is not something that you want to ponder, but it is important that we raise it. We cannot in any way not speak of this, Madam President. It really pains me to talk about this current situation in our healthcare system. We are fully aware of the challenges. Some of it is chronic. And many efforts by our healthcare professionals every day to perform their duties within some complex situations. But they are making complex situations. But you are saying that you made a mess when you inherited the system. That is what was said. Even after approving in this Honorable House, Madam President, the largest budget ever, signaling an increase in investment in the healthcare system, the services are still below par. And the question is why? This is very telling. We boast of an increase in investment, but yet the quality of the services has declined. Why is that? More money, Madam President, does not necessarily mean better healthcare services. That is what we are seeing. Madam President, this should caution the government that a new teaching hospital does not mean better healthcare services. We must focus. We must focus on what truly is required to deliver the best services to our people. However, Madam President, we should not be surprised of the track record of this administration in the delivery of healthcare services. They do not have a good track record, Madam President, and the facts will bear for everyone. Madam President, no one, none of us wants to a healthcare system for care only to be met with disappointment or, worst case, the loss of a loved one. It is a sector that truly transcends politics, because we all will get sick at some point in time in our lives, and we won't know the extent or where and when it will happen. Hence, our plea, my plea to this administration is to address these concerns now and address it immediately. Madam President, with the highest allocation in the history of the ministry, it is quite baffling that estimates reflect an unspent amount of $27 million, while we lack basic medication in our health facilities. Madam President, we need answers. The nation needs an explanation. Unfortunately for us, the Minister for Health is here in this house. So we look forward to him giving us a report on why and what are some of the issues. Madam President, if it could even get more worse, we have reports of health supplies being removed from various health centers and sent to the general hospital because of shortages. That is even further creating a problem for the primary health care service. This is a very serious issue. And I speak not because of just where I stand. I speak because of my experience working in the healthcare service. Madam President, I had an opportunity to manage the Princess Royal Hospital for a number of years. So when I speak, I am not speaking by guess, Madam President. I've had an opportunity to see patients come in and go out, and some not go out alive. Madam President, I've seen it, and I understand the importance of the health care to our people. And I am appealing that we ought not to be playing around with this. Because, Madam President, you know, the only time it hits home is when you are admitted. That's when it hits home. That's the only time. And you know, sometimes we hear a lot of stories, and we hear comparisons to other countries. Other countries do have challenges, Madam President. I have been admitted to hospitals outside of this country, not by choice. So I know. So, Madam President, when supplies have been removed from the rural communities that speaks to a big issue, a serious issue. This, we believe, is unacceptable. We need to fix this immediately. We need to get this done now. Madam President, after reviewing the Ministry of Health budgetary allocation, there is a need for further explanation to clarify what was presented in the budget statement by the Minister of Finance on page 21, indicating a budgetary allocation of $7.5 million for a new teaching hospital scheduled to be completed in 3 years, and $3.5 million to recommence the National Health Insurance Program. However, Madam President, after reviewing the estimates of revenue and expenditure for 2024, there are no such budgetary allocations for these items. I believe, I do trust that the Minister, and not just no budgetary allocation for next year, but for the next 3 years. I do hope the Minister of Finance and can help the Minister for Health in clarifying why there were no such allocations. Maybe funds might be coming from the World Bank. We never know. So, with some friends, so we look forward, the nation is looking forward to that, because I ask this, Madam President, because we can't come here and say that we're going to build a new teaching hospital and our budgetary document is not showing any funding for such item. And you said that 7.5 million was budgeted, but it's not in the document. So we believe that it requires some clarification. I ask the Minister for Health to please help us just clear this up, Madam President. Madam President, the 2024 budget statement speaks to achievements as it relates to upgrading health centers, health facilities. Madam President, I smile, but a little laugh came when I saw the list of achievements of facilities that this administration would have upgraded. You know, in local parlance, we have a thing we just say, when somebody says something funny, we just say, I cry. Madam President, I really cry. When I see the list of facilities that this administration put forward as their achievement, Madam President, being the former Minister for Infrastructure, I am well acquainted with the projects that we have signed off on and projects that we were implementing. So when I see the Princess Royal Smart Hospital, I was shocked. I believe that was a misprint. When I see the Hillsborough Smart Health Center, the Victoria Health Center, Madam President, when I went on site and I looked at the health center in Victoria, we made a decision to demolish and rebuild. I don't know how that is an achievement of this administration. Wester Hall Health Center, Madam President, these are the new National Party-led projects, Madam President. So we give you another fiscal year. We give you another fiscal year to the new National Party-led administration achievements. That is our achievement, Madam President. Madam President, how can you tell this nation that you inherit a mess? You say that you inherit a mess. But at the same time, you're promoting the achievements of the new National Party administration, taking credit for work that you didn't do, while deliberately misinforming your past of these projects as your achievement. Madam President, I don't know. There must be a word for such a behavior, but I don't know it. I really don't know it. I'll have to find out after this session, Madam President. There must be a word for such a behavior. I know in my upbringing, my parents cautioned me about that, about taking credit for other people's work. We can't do that. We can't allow that in 2023. Madam President. Madam President, let me go further. Let me go further. Phase 2 of the General Hospital. National Party never do nothing in health. Never do anything in health. That is what was said. Phase 2 of the General Hospital, Madam President. This project was abandoned by the then NDC administration. Today, that project was successfully completed by the new National Party administration, Madam President. Now we are hearing boasting of transforming healthcare with a new accident and emergency. Madam President, let me list what we did. As I said, from where I sat, I had an intricate walk-in with what was happening. The new dialysis unit, Madam President, we did that. We did that, Madam President. The diagnostic lab, the X-ray, CT scanner, we secured that. New ambulances, we did that. The Guav Polyclinic, Madam President. Well, I don't know. And the list goes on. Madam President, it is not a good example to pass off someone else's work as yours. Yeah, I encourage you to stop it immediately. The nation is watching. Our young kids are watching. I cry, Madam President, when I hear that. I have to. I couldn't even laugh. Madam President, we see the trend. We see the trend. You are 18 months. We want to see, the nation want to see you start coming up with your new initiatives. You establish a whole ministry named MIT to implement and transform and mobilize, and we go hear what the unblocking just now. You don't worry. Don't worry. We could deal with all the unblocking just now. Madam President, I want to move on to infrastructure. The Ministry of Infrastructure Development is often deemed, Madam President, the heartbeat of economic activity in most economies like ours. And when it is not handled adequately, the entire nation will feel its negative impact, Madam President. Madam President, it was said by the other side that we should not only critique them, but we should also offer recommendations. It is often said so. I stand corrected. Madam President, as such, I take this opportunity to offer such recommendation. Madam President, and this recommendation is in the interest of the ministry, is in the interest of this country, and that is why I believe this recommendation should be made. Madam President, the Minister for Infrastructure Development, or Honorable Prime Minister, who frequently offers free advice in the other place, understands. In his profession, he usually receives compensation for giving advice. But today, Madam President, I'm offering free advice. It is my humble belief, Madam President, from my knowledge and understanding of the workings and demands of the Ministry of Infrastructure Development, that the current Minister for Infrastructure, I believe, needs to immediately pass the responsibility of the ministry to another Minister of Government who is more present on island and grounded to properly guide senior management of the ministry to ensure the implementation of this important project to achieve this for the good of this nation. Madam President, we are all aware that traveling for international and regional engagements are in demand for the Honorable Prime Minister and of great priority to him. At this time, Hence, Madam President, I kindly ask that some consideration be given to this genuine and humble recommendation, with the knowledge that it is the right of the government and the leader of government to make his own decisions. However, Madam President, I must say that if we continue in the manner which we are going to see more negative impacts from an economic standpoint. The Ministry of Infrastructure requires hands-on to ensure that projects are implemented properly and in a timely manner. You cannot run the Ministry of Infrastructure from afar. It just would not work. That is my advice. Madam President, however, I must commend the ministry for seeking to continue with some of the key important public sector investment projects. These projects play a critical role, whether it's increasing climate resilience footprint, or increasing access to critical services, or creating significant economic opportunities. These projects do have an important stake in this country's growth and development landscape. However, the continued implementation of these projects have been far below par, and in some cases, non-existent, like the Ministry of MIT. Madam President, most notably, and I hear the utterances that we lose funding for the Western Corridor. Madam President, we had an opportunity to dialogue with the UKCIF officials, CDB officials. We had set a time frame. We had set an implementation schedule. Everything was moving, and we were having weekly meetings. That is my last recollection and understanding what transpired before the general elections. So I don't know, I don't understand how all of a sudden you lose something which you left in good order. I can say more. I can say more, Madam President. But if the current administration had operated with some level of due diligence and principle in terms of handover, they would not have lost the funding. And I'll give you an example, Madam President, as we go on. And you will hear many more. So when they came in, is clean house, whoosh, wash. Everybody is politically aligned. Firing this, firing that. Don't touch anything. That is how you lost the funding. That is how you lost the funding. You put everything on pause for more than 6 months. That is what you did. So by the time you get your people in place, by the time you go to start to negotiate with CDB, it was too late. And it presents an excellent opportunity for the UKCIF to withdraw the funds, because they too were challenged, because they had a policy mandate by the new government at that time to withdraw, pull back all funding wherever they were giving support throughout the world, because the UK government were having also challenges at home. But by not taking action, you open the window for them to withdraw the funds. Fortunately, I think they understand the importance of the water component of the project. And it was also looking bad on their part by not giving some commitment, by withdrawing all. And hence the reason why the water component was saved, Madam President. And those are the facts. Those are the facts. We didn't lose anything. You lost it. You lost it. And we go hear more. Madam President, the Molyneux landslip. The famous Molyneux landslip. And it's the same thing again. Madam President, you had an engineering firm equipped with some of the top engineers throughout the region and the world working on the Molyneux landslip. Come up with an adequate design. We had several consultations with the public, with persons in the Molyneux area. They had an opportunity to speak directly to the engineers, to ask questions, to raise concerns. Madam President, one of the first actions, they fire the engineering firm. You fire the engineer from the person who designed the roadmap for the implementation of the project. You fire them. And you want it to be installed, implemented successfully? This is craziness, Madam President. That is what happened. That is why we are in this mess. With the firing of the engineering firm, they brought in some other engineers and they decide to come up with their own ideas. And they start to excavate into the embankment, not understanding. We had one of the top geologists working for weeks and months to come up with this design. Understanding, they did all the drilling, all the pores, they know that the slope was unstable. Hence the reason why the slope was not excavated. Somebody come up with a brilliant idea to bench the slope. And I don't know. God forbid, I'm telling you, that area is very unstable as we speak. The persons up on the Mount Murray side, we are just very hopeful that nothing serious happens. We are very, very hopeful that the project can be implemented because the people of Molyneux requires that roadway to be reinstalled. So don't come on national TV and say you have a better design now. You made a mess of it. You made a mess of it. Piles were driven and have to be abandoned. So I am very hopeful that we could get that project sorted out. I'm very hopeful, Madam President. Madam President, Mount Kuma Road, how beautiful. That is how things must be implemented. That is how projects are implemented. While we were busy working on the Molyneux Road, we took a visionary decision to open a new roadway to further facilitate the access of traffic. And what is happening within that area? We have new communities being developed, new homes, persons are going, the value of the land in that area is also going up. That is what we did. We didn't leave a mess. We didn't leave a mess. We didn't leave everything was right. We are not perfect. We make errors. But don't give the nation the impression that we made a mess. And we'll go further. We'll talk a lot of things. COVID and a lot of stuff. We have a lot of things to talk about. Now, President, really and truly, I think we need to look at the standing orders and amend the time for this debate. I would have really loved to do like a 3 hours today. Trust me. I'm feeling it. Madam President, the Maurice Bishop International Airport Upgrade Project. Madam President, I recall clearly during the midst of COVID, when we sit down and we assess and we analyze the opportunities for implementing the project during that slow period, because we would have heavy equipment to move. Now we have less traffic on the road. We thought that was the best time to accelerate certain aspects of the project. We were vilified, Madam President. We were accused of selling out our country to a foreign nation. We were accused of wasting money on the airport upgrade. Why are we doing this now? when we have COVID and people falling sick, Madam President. Those were the comments by the other side. Today, Madam President, we have a sudden turn of events. This project is now a major achievement for this government. How magical. How magical. Talking about the bridges and what. I'm telling you, Madam President, there must be a word for a behavior like this. I have to find it before the session finish, Madam President. There must be. Madam President, the fact is that this project was launched under the stewardship of Honorable Gregory Bowen, then Minister for Works in 2019. I only came in thereafter in October of 2020 and took up the baton and moved the project forward. Them time we were actually starting to implement. Madam President, we hired a project management company to ensure that government interests and the project deliverables were met to specification. That is how we operate. That is how we operate. We understand the importance of what we are doing. And if you look at the work that is going on there now, Madam President, and what that will do. And you know, Madam President, and we haven't really linked the two as yet. But I firmly believe, and maybe before the end of the session when I do my research, those upgrades that we are doing now may well be as a result of this increase in ELIF that we are receiving, Madam President. That is the vision. Madam President, there are several other projects I wish to highlight that were implemented or commenced by the new National Party government. The famous traffic lights. Madam President, famous, I say famous. I recall at one of our press conference, post-cabinet press briefing, it was said that the traffic lights cost $30 million, 30 million US dollars. That was far from the truth. It was said everything was traffic light. It was a waste of time, everything. Madam President, I'm not certain if the members on the other side may have any indication of those utterances, Madam President. Madam President, by June 2023, prior to election, all equipments and inputs for the traffic light were purchased. All, because everything had to be manufactured to specifications. We signed the project for the traffic light in June of 2021, Madam President. In June of 2021. You know what has happened before that? Months of traffic studies was taking place, indicating where the lights are going to be, monitoring the traffic, the busy time, the slow time. That traffic lights that you see there now, Madam President, was not done by guess. There was also another critical component I do hope that the government, current administration, ensure that that is delivered. A training component, Madam President. Local persons are to be trained in the operational management of that traffic light so that we do not have to call in people whenever we have errors with it, issues with it. That is built into the contract, Madam President. So just in case MIT doesn't know, they should know by today. They will know by the time I finish. Madam President, the St. John's River project. This project is such an important project. And we see that there is budgetary allocation for it to continue. We need to have this project completed. I do not want to come back here next year, Madam President, and talk about this project not being completed. We need to just complete it and bring some peace and comfort to the people of Riverwood. It's about time. Madam President, the Simon Cultural Center, that center was destroyed by Hurricane Ivan in 2004. And we work steadfastly to ensure together with the community. We had concept designs, we had meetings. We also shared the concept designs in the diaspora to also get feedback from persons to ensure that we are building what the people want. Madam President, this project is also struggling in terms of implementation. I understand why. I understand why. I understand why, because you have a whole ministry to implement, running all over the place while, not doing nothing, Madam President. That's why nothing, absolutely nothing. We go get to the nothing just now. Madam President, the Grenville Commercial Complex. That was a very important initiative for the town of Grenville. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it in this budget allocation. And we urge going forward that this project be put back on board, put back on the list of projects to be done. It will be a critical project for the town of Grenville, Madam President. Madam President, I sat here this morning and I listened to the government, leader of government, on the other side, spoke not so highly of the Chinese low-income housing. When speaking about government plans for Project 500, he said that we don't want no house without no backyard, no front yard. If you lie, the hand said, kill bear. You don't want no apartment where you just go in and you just be inside. Madam President, I'm confused. I'm very confused. And taken aback with his comment. When his government, the NDC government, has never provided houses for the people of this country. Madam President, we are very grateful to the People's Republic of China for their generous support and donation. Madam President, what is most concerning in this 2024 budget is the capital expenditure. That capital expenditure has only increased by 7%, a mere 7%. And that is concerning. That is very concerning. And if you recall, when I started speaking on infrastructure, I reiterated the importance of investing in the sector. Because when you invest in the sector, it creates economic activity. So if it's only 7%, the bulk of the increases is on the recurrent side. It means that will be a non-performing budget, Madam President. When you have all these increases just for wages and salaries and travel and leisures and all kind of stuff, which brings in no return, which does not impact the economy, especially on the revenue side and on the collection of revenue side, that is a problem. When you invest on the capital side, Madam President, what it does is spur economic activity. All the businesses, all the services are impacted. And so you collect revenue through that because it's a consumption tax, Madam President. But the capital side of the budget is where the economic activities originate. And because of this very little increase in investment on the capital side, there is a clear indication that the sector will only result in slower growth and less economic activity for 2024, sadly, Madam President. Madam President, I was kind of encouraged. I didn't really plan to speak on agriculture. But seeing that my good friend and minister with responsibility for agriculture is in the house, I think it's fitting that I speak on it. And it's also fitting because you know that is an area of competencies for me as well. We worked with the Ministry of Agriculture sometime in the past. So we do have some history. Madam President, agriculture is touted as one of the critical pillars for the government transformation agenda. But I must register my support for the agriculture census and the Youth in Agriculture project. I think those are two very critical initiatives taking place at this point in time. And I see budget allocation for those in 2024. However, the implementation of other key projects in the ministry is below this usual standard, Madam President. We heard the leader of government business giving some justification, Madam President, for this whopping 23 million unspent or unimplemented monies in the budget. We heard that there was support from the World Bank, but we can only be guided by what is in the estimates of revenue and expenditure, Madam President. We are aware, Madam President, we are fully aware the challenges that workers face in the service and the ministry, of course. And there are admissions of low morale and enthusiasm among staff, Madam President, within the ministry and other ministries. This is an admission by the government, Madam President. It is clear with their intention for its pay and grade policy. It means that something is happening there. If persons are performing, if persons are doing what they're supposed to do, then there ought not to be a discussion about pay and grade. So there is some brewing issue there, Madam President. Madam President, the Minister for Agriculture do have some work to do to reverse its course of action in order to achieve results in this critical sector. My colleague from the Farmers Rep, Honorable Roderick St. Clair, I know will speak more on this going forward, on how farmers are not enthusiastic. For whatever reason it is, they are not enthusiastic about the support and the performance of the Ministry of Agriculture currently. They have lost some significant confidence, Madam President, in the ministry to deliver on their needs during this period. And I do understand, Madam President. I do understand how they feel. I do understand how they feel when it is almost impossible, Madam President, for them to access agriculture financing for production on the farms from the Greater Development Bank. But only to find out, Madam President, with just a phone call or having some political leverage, some members of the cabinet can immediately access millions of dollars for their own personal purposes. Madam President, if you are a farmer, this must be troubling to you. This must be troubling to you. Must be. Why is it so difficult for him or her who is involved in agriculture to be able to access funding for production, we hear a lot about the whole issue of value added. There must be some avenue for persons to be able to access funding to grow, to invest. I do hope we can get a report, Madam President, on the CES 30 million, how much persons were benefited. And I wanted to speak some on that, but I believe that the government side will give us some reports on the performance of CES and how much farmers would have benefited from this $30 million. We look forward to that, Madam President. I asked, Madam President, how could this be fair? How could this be right and just? Let us put ourselves in the position of the hardworking farmers who make their livelihood only from farming. Only from farming. Madam President, the optics, it doesn't look right. It's unacceptable. Not because we have the power to do certain things, doesn't mean that we should do it. I could never understand the reasoning behind those actions, Madam President. I am lost for words. I am lost. Madam President, pretty elasticity. Pretty elasticity has continued to be a thorn in the lives of our farmers. And I'm certain that my dear colleague is happy that I'm leading the debate on pretty elasticity. I know that he is happy about that. This is a long-standing and chronic issue, which efforts have been made in the past to eradicate, but in more words, eradicate or minimize. But more needs to be done. I recall, Madam President, in this Honorable House in 2020, we passed legislation updating the Pre-Deal Larceny Act with specific emphasis on source-up. Persons who are source-up farmers and the registration and having to give information, you couldn't just go and sell stuff or export source-up. So some work have been done, but much more needs to be done. Madam President, I see the efforts of my colleague, Rep for Farmers in the Senate. Come here time and time again to seek support from the government side to address an antiquated Crop Compensation Act. Very simple. I'm hearing boasting of all sorts of monies. We have monies, billions to pay off. We have monies that we could pay pension 10 times over. That is what I heard, Madam President. Why? Why is it so difficult to just review and update the Crop Compensation Act so that if a farmer have a damage or a loss, he can be properly compensated? What is so difficult about that? I do hope in this session of Parliament, I will celebrate if we all can come together. I do hope that, I believe that my dear colleague is working well with the Minister for Agriculture. And we do hope to see that revised Crop Compensation Act for all farmers of this nation being addressed finally. And that is my true and honest hope, Madam President. Madam President, I want to speak a little bit on finance and the economy. CBI, Madam President. Madam President, you know, I'm happy to hear the sale of passports is no longer a sale for patrimony. You know, I'm really, really happy to hear that. Because when we embarked on that program, Madam President, we were taken down, selling passports, selling out the country. Now, Madam President, the same people is boasting about selling more. I am confused. I am confused. And again, taking credit for the vision and policy of the new National Party administration. There must be a award for that, Madam President. There must be a award for that. Madam President, when I hear my colleagues saying that we didn't save money for rainy days, I couldn't believe. Madam President, I wonder if the member was here in COVID. I wonder. The new National Party administration, we governed outstandingly during COVID. Every public servant who was home for months received full salary. We even went further to pay persons in the private sector a percentage of their wages. Businesses, bus drivers, vendors, monies were paid, Madam President. So I don't know how, we're talking about a pandemic. Some of the same countries that I heard him boasting about that we should emulate, after the first month, Madam President, they could not pay their public servants, and we could have paid ours. So I wonder who should emulate who, Madam President. Yeah, I just find that didn't make much sense at all. So I had to remind him. Madam President. Madam President, the government policy of bi-monthly payments, and not according to me, Madam President, according to the government side. The bi-monthly payments was pursued for two objectives, according to the government. One, to increase the frequency at which monies meet the hands of employees to assist them with the cash flow. That's one, first objective. Second objective, to create more frequent spending to spur increased economic activity. Today, Madam President, I hear the government speak of this policy as if it was just an exercise or an activity to just say we pay salaries bi-monthly. which is not. Madam President, the question is, have this policy decision achieved the set objectives? Can you successfully say that the bi-monthly payments have achieved those two set objectives? Can you say that the person's cash flow are much better? Can you say that there is more economic activity? Well, I expect you to say it, Madam President. I expect them to say it. But I get a strong sense that they don't believe it, Madam President. I get a strong sense that they don't believe it. Madam President, we have not seen any increase in any economic activity. And I'll tell you why, Madam President. We have not seen that throughout the desired month by this policy of bi-monthly payment of salary. Madam President, what I want to hear, just don't do us what you did. Just don't say that you just did it, Madam President. The question is it working? I don't think it is working, Madam President. While I understand the objective of this policy, which may have worked in some countries, I must admit the rollout do have some serious nagging issues, which is seen as a nightmare for most workers' finances, Madam President. The following must be addressed immediately to improve this current policy decision. 1, the frequent late payment to many employees is creating a budgeting and spending nightmare for people. And that is a fact, which may have been brought on by the government policy to change the time in which salaries are applied on a monthly basis from the 20-something of the month to the 30th of the month. And I'll further explain, Madam President. When you send the monies to the bank on the 30th, remember, and the credit unions, remember they have internal processes. Those monies are not going to be arriving on the employee's account until days after, Madam President. Days after. Remember, it's thousands of workers. And every 15 days, the issue of having to prepare all those vouchers for payments, especially persons who are submitting invoices for payments. The persons who are working, preparing those invoices, as soon as the week done, they have to get ready to start preparing for the next fortnight. It's a never-ending process. It's creating an administrative nightmare for a number of departments and even some of the financial institutions. Madam President, need to look into this to ensure that when people work, they should not be making 3 and 4 trips to the credit union at the bank asking, the money come? The money come? The workers are tired. In the bank are tired. People calling and asking if the money come. They are tired. We have to fix this. If you want this policy to be successful, you have to fix this. Second, Madam President, second issue with this policy. This policy is well established. It is a well-established understanding, Madam President, before this policy was implemented, that every business person look forward to a month-end sales bump. Every person know, every small shop know month-end, and fellas come in and clear up the body this month-end, and stocking up month-end. Madam President, that gone. Twice he had no month-end bump, Madam President. That gone. That gone. You're telling me? I will know it. I will know it, I'm telling you. He had a month-end bump. Remember, it's not no full bump, it's a half bump here. Half bump there and a half bump there. How it could be the same? It can never be the same. It's just common sense. If I receive my full salary at the end of the month and I only get in half when month-end come, how would I have the same financial impact? It's just common sense. That has gone. Don't ask me, go ask the business people. Go ask them if they see the sales and month-end. Go and ask them if they see the same sales. The numbers are there, the financials are there. There's business people here. They could just check their records to see from the time they have paid us, see if your sales have gone up at the end of the month or it has decreased. I rest my case on this. You know, you're making sense. You would make sense because you don't have a business. You're making sense. The rep for the business committee, if I know him very well, he will speak the truth. He will speak the truth. As much as he might be a supporter of this government and a supporter of Grader, I have known him for one who will speak the truth. And if I make a mistake, I stand by my error. Madam President, the infamous seed. You know, Madam President, I don't want to speak too much on this, but I have to say a few things. I look at the time, I have half an hour more, but we'll see how we squeeze it in. Madam President, if you take something from me, Madam President, if you take $1 from me, yeah? And then you're realizing that you have done me an injustice and you give me back $150. Could that be seen as you give me $150 when you took the dollar from me that you're not supposed to take? Oh, that could be right. Madam President, it is just a cover-up. It's just a cover-up. What the government needs to do, Madam President, is to admit you made an error. You made an error. You should not have stopped the payment. You should not have stopped it because it affected ordinary people, needy people significantly. And that is the point we are saying. That is the point we are making. And the reason why the payment is reinstalled, why is it reinstalled? Why it was reinstalled? I'll leave that to here, why it was reinstalled. I ain't going to say. Why it was reinstalled permanently? Because, Madam President, we, the other side, the taker increase permanently. So, yeah, so don't worry. Don't worry, the people know. The people know. Madam President, one thing I have been taught and learned, man don't live by bread alone. Yeah, so, Madam President, I don't have to take anything. I don't have to take anything. I come here with nothing, and I leave in with absolutely nothing, Madam President. But we'll get to that. We'll get to what we're taking just now. We'll get to that. I'd like to start it. Madam President, but I have to ask, you know, this administration has been touting, and I'm sorry my member for labor is not here, about the dock salaries and paying back the dock salaries. Madam President, I call on this government to pay back the seat people the 18 months of the 150. Yeah. Pay the retroactive. You have a history of wanting to pay back and pay back. Pay it, Madam President. Yeah. Give back the people the 18 months of the 150 that you took from them. Give it back. Madam President, I'm certain that I'm not wrong. I think that is a fair call. But I am only saying I didn't plan to, Madam President.
No conversation from the other side. No conversation. Decorum, please.
I thought I can't control this. Madam President, I am only saying this because we heard it. We all heard it. Everybody who is listening heard it. That we have millions of dollars. We have money. That is what was said. 10 times over to pay pension. That was said this morning. Madam President. Madam President, you know what is even most troubling? What is even most troubling? At the same time those deductions were made, an allowance was given. Non-tax allowance was given to ministers. $2,000. I don't have no issue with that. I don't have no issue. The point I'm making is that, why? Why take them for people to change? Why? Don't do that. So, I believe that we are in agreement that you say that you know your Prime Minister and he has a good heart. I believe that he will do the right thing. and paid retroactive. Madam President, it appears the big pronouncement for this 2024 budget from the government is the increase in income for parliamentarians. Madam President, I have an issue with this proposed policy decision, and I will make position clear on it. First thing, Madam President, it appears that the process at which we arrive at these increases, the government arrives at these increases, I believe that it could have been done better. I heard the member on the other side say, we are people-centered, we like to consult with people. But I'm sorry, you never consult them what you increase. You never consult them what you increase. Did you tell them what you were giving yourself before you came here, Madam President? Did you tell the people? You said you have several consultations in the diaspora, Madam President. Those were the words of the leader of government business on the other side this morning. Several consultations in the diaspora. Did you call them and tell them, Blow, I'm going to raise my salary by 5,000? What do you think? You didn't tell them that. We are saying, Madam President, an opportunity to have an independent committee do the review would have been a more transparent and level process. That is all we're saying, and we have an issue with that. While we support the increase for members of parliament who are not ministers of government, Madam President, we do not support any such increases for members of parliament who are ministers of government and who are already receiving a minister's salary. That is the issue of 83,000 plus annually, Madam President. While the talk of people-centered, Madam President, this is a self-centered policy, Madam President, being proposed. No, little or no relief taxes to the general nation, Madam President. And we see increased taxes on vehicle registration fees going up, Madam President, while we touting a big 100 and plus increase for parliamentarians. When pegged against the incentive package for the category of workers, who stands out? What stands out, Madam President, is the issue of what is taxable. Madam President, what baffles me is that if you are giving someone an honorarium, I know in the past we would have given honorarium and we would have taxed it. But we have a unique situation, Madam President, where we are giving an honorarium of $500, one-off, at the same time as parliamentarians, and more so for the government side, you have an increase in your income of over 100%. That is not being taxed, and which is permanent. Madam President, I believe that if you're giving the nurses $500, you give them $500. Yeah. I think there is an opportunity to not tax the $500 or not tax the $1,000, Madam President. Only 25% afterthought for the public workers. I am saying that why tax those and ensure that what you're receiving is not taxed? If we tax it low, we tax everything. If we ain't taxing low, we don't tax. Isn't that fair? Isn't that fair? Madam President, you know, when I heard of this increase, I recall, I saw a Facebook post live for a particular member of government on Facebook, seemingly warding off constituents by stating that sometimes you only have $2 on the bank account. Madam President, after this increase, I don't think I will see such a post. I don't think that person can come out and say they only have $2 on their account. If anything, they should be telling constituents, come, because there is also a proposed $10,000 a month. $10,000 a month. I will speak about that, Madam President. This is of grave concern. And I'll offer some suggestions, Madam President. There are a number of government programs that provide support for constituents every month. Why is it necessary to add another layer? Why is it necessary to make available to parliamentarians another $10,000? No knowledge of how it's going to be done? Why not put that extra $10,000 in the other programs, in the programs that are currently existing? Why? I don't know. This doesn't smell right, Madam President. Because from the utterances of the Minister of Finance, they don't know how they are going to disburse this $10,000. $10,000 a month, Madam President. That is, well, they have plenty of money. That is what he said. They have billions. Madam President, I caution the government against this policy, to review it and recommend that you channel those monies and you can put structures in place to facilitate easy access. But I don't believe that disbursing those monies in the hands of the parliamentary rep is the best thing for him or her, or constituents and this country, Madam President. That is my honest belief. Madam President, if I ask every member of this House, either on this side or the other side, as to why, children meet you, you go to school, students meet you, and they ask you, why did you get involved in politics? Why did you become a parliamentarian? Why did you enter the parliament? I'm certain, Madam President, most of the responses will immediately say, that's an opportunity to serve the people who we love deeply and to make a contribution to the development of this country. I think that is a standard answer that we're going to get, and we have heard it here several times before the people. If such is the case, Madam President, why is the justification for the increased income for parliamentarians, and notably so the ministers of government, be leveled for the fear of corruption? Why, Madam President? Why is that the most suitable justification for offering an increase? Madam President, I mean, when I heard this, I was very disturbed. Madam President, I would not want to be in any way categorized as wanting an increase because of fear that I may do something sinister or corrupt. I do not want it, if that is the case. Madam President, I was raised better than that. Madam President, I felt very embarrassed. I felt very embarrassed for parliamentarians to be labeled like that. And this has nothing to do with this side and the other side. This is, I believe, it wasn't intended to probably come out the way that it came out. But I know each and every one of us here do have some level of commitment towards serving this nation. And for the justification for an increase in income to be put forward because of vulnerability to corruption, I believe this, Madam President, is not right. Those remarks are misplaced, and I believe an apology should be rendered. That is my personal opinion, Madam President. and I rest my case on it. Madam President, and for some of us who are listening and not sure what I'm speaking about the beggy comment, Madam President. I don't think any one of us here want to be labeled as beggars at all in any way, Madam President. I rest my case on that, Madam President. Madam President, pensions. Pensions was a long-standing chronic issue. But with the definitive ruling of the court, this issue is now settled, I believe. However, I am somewhat puzzled by the subject of pension reform. Maybe the Minister for Labor can offer some more clarification on that. Or maybe the representative for Labor in the Senate, Senator Lewis, can bring some clarity in his response on this matter, if it is a genuine issue. But I recall, Madam President, of seeing it in the budget statement, the issue of pension reform. It is my understanding, Madam President, and from the utterances from the other side, the High Court ruling was clear, definitive, and absolute. That is what I understand. And so the issue of pension reform should not be a discussion, because the whole nation understands what pension we're going with, how people are going to be compensated. So I probably need some clarification on that. I just raise it for what is what, Madam President. That is what I see, because I know that if I could recall, the issue of pension reform is what was against the 1958 pension in the court, and 1958 pension won. So I wait to hear what this issue is about. And I guess as much, this sitting would not be the only time we may have the debate on that particular issue, but we may have more going forward, Madam President. Madam President, minimum wage. Madam President, while I'm in support of increased minimum wage, I give way to my colleague, Senator Rama, and the business representative in the Senate, who is, I believe, is better positioned to treat with the intricacies of this policy action and what the positive and negative implications that it may have for workers and businesses and the nation as a whole. But, Madam President, there are two critical issues that were identified with the new minimum wage proposal, and we think in every aspect what we put forward, it is for correction, for the betterment of persons who are going to be benefiting from it, and it's not an issue of critiquing, but indicating that this might be a possible issue, Madam President. And those two identified issues are, one, the lack or failure to either to clarify or not include the consideration for hours work instead of day work. I think that is something that is more progressive in terms of looking at hours work, especially for the hospitality sector, as against the other areas, Madam President. So that is something that I know the Minister for Labor, who have been working hard on this, that's her baby. I presume that's her baby, and I know that she would want to see it through successfully. The second issue, Madam President, is the disparity in compensation for certain services based on the location. And so what he's saying that if I'm a cleaner working at certain areas in the different areas which are in the country, there are different rates applied. So if you're working in Carriacou as a sweeper, you might get a different rate as if you're working in Grand and Sierra. There might be good justification, good reason, but I believe it is important for those clarities to be leveled so that people are not misunderstand. So I raise those two issues from a genuine place. Madam Senator, for Senator Joseph. So, Madam President, the famous MIT, Madam President, I have been resolute in my presentation at the 2023 budget debate. And I said it, and I believe it, that there is no need for no ministry of MIT. And I stand firm by my belief. Understanding what is required in terms of implementation and monitoring for important projects. Madam President, to this day, I still believe so. And in looking at the presentation in the other place, Madam President, by the Minister for MIT, further strengthen my position, Madam President. The Ministry of MIT is not necessary, Madam President. It's a waste of valuable resources. And what is even, I mean, I cannot verify, but there are allegations and reports that almost all the staff from the MIT came from a certain spot. I don't know if it's a hot spot or a cold spot, Madam President. I don't know. It came from a certain spot. I'm not sure. Madam President, but in reviewing the estimates for the 2024 budget, I noticed an allocation of $500,000 for a new crane truck for MIT. I don't know why. Maybe the leader for government business can give some explanation to this allocation for $500,000 for a crane truck for MIT. Why that is placed there? I think something of that nature, a capital item of that nature, is better placed with the Ministry of Infrastructure, who may have the expertise and so for managing such an equipment and to handle such an expenditure. So I basically wanted to just raise that for what it's worth. Well, Madam President, when I listened to the presentation that was given by the MIT minister on his performance for the year 2023, I was not surprised. I really wasn't surprised. Because I know, running around dilly-dally and doing all kind of things, all kind of niceties, you have to come and report. You must come and report to the nation. You have to come here and report. Not on Facebook, it's here you have to report, Madam President. The content and the duration of his contribution to the budget debate, I believe, Madam President, is a direct correlation to the ministry's performance of the last year. That is how I feel, Madam President. And you know what is most amusing, Madam President? He came in with a piece of tired PVC pipe in his hand in Parliament stating that he unblocking projects in the pipeline. But you know what was funny, Madam President? The piece of pipe here, both ends of the pipe were blocked. Both ends of the pipe were blocked, but he unblocking pipeline. I never see more mawet, never see more mawet, more commerce, pure foolishness, Madam President. I'm telling you. Things don't get implemented by grandstanding. You have to attain the necessary capacity. Get the work done. No long talk. No posting for likes. You have to get the work done. Get the work done. What we say? I cry. Madam President, my recommendation remains. And my recommendation to deal with implementation is that the government needs to compile a competent team or department attached to the Ministry of Finance, preferably, or the Ministry of Infrastructure, which we believe will be better, far more efficient and effective as to what is now implementation. We can find something to do. We could give my minister without portfolio, something, we could find something to do. But what is now implementation is not working. It's not working. I believe, Madam President, if I'm not mistaken, and I stand corrected, the ministry itself, its own implementation is 40%, if I'm not mistaken, based on my analysis from the estimates of revenue, but I stand corrected. Because, you know, everybody comes differently. So, you never know. Madam President, I wish to signal when my allotted time comes, I want to stick in a request, Madam President, for additional 15 minutes. I may not need the whole 15, but I think to avoid having to disturb the Honorable Chair, I think it would be more suitable so that I can just ask for the minutes so that we can have a smooth flow as we go into Carriacou and Petit Martinique. Madam President.
Thank you for your early warning. It's 1:25. You have by standard till 1:30, and then we can add 15 minutes additional to that by your request, and therefore proceed with that understanding. Thank you.
Much appreciated, Madam President.
And no need to rush back to Carriacou from the Senate. This is your other home.
Madam President, that is something that we'll debate about. Madam President, the people of Carriacou and Petit Martinique will be always dear to me. I have a long-standing and a proud history of serving them, and in turn, benefiting from the support and guidance over the years. Madam President, you could say the people of Carriacou and Petit Martinique have raised me. Madam President, the longest time I've spent outside of Carriacou on a consistent basis is between the period 2018 to 2023, when I moved with my family to accept responsibility to started off as the Minister for Youth, Sports and Culture, and then moved to the Ministry of Infrastructure, Madam President. But before that, all my entire life I've been in Carriacou, Madam President. Madam President, this relationship is deeply rooted. It is not based on any political position, but it is based on a genuine passion, love, and commitment that I have for an outstanding and unique people in every aspect, Madam President. Madam President, I must commend the government and the Ministry of Carriacou and Petit Martinique on the building of the new free center in Windward, as the old one was deemed unrepairable and unsafe. And of course, that is a very good project, Madam President. I commend them for that. I also commend the budgetary allocation for supporting boat building, but I question the methodology, as it requires a surgical process to achieve such a realistic success in dealing with sustaining such a critical heritage, Madam President. We are also happy to see that the government's continued development works on the botanical gardens. Madam President, I was very skeptical as so much negative was said about the plan to improve the botanical gardens by the former Minister for Carriacou and Petit Martinique Affairs, the Honorable Kinja Mathurin Stewart. I didn't think she had not a rest a day about the botanical gardens. But today, we see that that is a premier venue for all things government, Madam President. But we are happy. We are happy that they now see the vision and value in what we were seeking to achieve, Madam President. So we are happy about that. As we have seen time and time and again, just pumping money into festivals and initiatives without any strategic plan of action results in failure. While I support, Madam President, the increase for subventions for festivals in Carriacou, there is an issue in terms of the quality of the festivals and whether or not just pumping money can sustain them. There needs to be more work for those critical festivals to survive. Monies are not more monies are not going to save them, as we have seen. It's not going to save them, Madam President. So significant work needs to be done in that area to ensure that that is done. But Madam President, as regards to the boat building, I wish to signal to this House that the National Party administration would have done some prior work together with the National Training Agency and I believe UNDP to develop what you call boat building standards together with TAMCC. And the objective of that was to develop a manual so that persons can go to TAMCC and they will be taught from this manual how to build a wooden vessel from scratch. Madam President, I was part of that process, and we had inputs from all the top shipwrights and seamen from Carriacou and Pitimatnik who contributed to the development of the document. And you know what was very telling, Madam President, is that the person who came to prepare the manual and know a squat about boat building. You know, our people actually go from page to page, chapter to chapter, and actually build that manual. And I think that was an amazing thing. I'm not certain where that manual is now, but I think it's an opportunity for the Ministry of Carriacou and Diplomatic Affairs to sort it out and to use that as a basis in terms of reviving the boat building, because you must have some teaching component. I don't think just taking money and giving somebody to build a boat is the real true way or methodology for saving it. But you have to embed it in the minds of the persons who love and have a passion for doing it. So I want to make that statement, Madam President. Madam President, there's much talk about the build of the ministerial complex. This project has been under consideration for some time, a number of years. There have been varying designs and plans for this facility, which I've seen. Some time back, actually, preparatory some works would have been commenced. I think there was a demolition of the old site, the old building. Some $337,000 was spent out of one of the $500,000 budgetary allocation to demolish the site. So both previous parliamentary rep and current parliamentary rep, they all see this as something that they want to do. Fine, but Madam President, for me, while the construction of the new building, the ministry has merit, I believe that there are more important projects that should take priority. Nonetheless, it's the government policy, the ministry decision, and so we see how that goes. Madam President, I wish to advise the Ministry of Carriacou and Diplomatic Affairs to strongly consider, and let me explain, acquisition of private property, which is adjacent to the ministry site. And this government thought of acquiring properties. You know, you have a speciality in acquiring properties. So I don't see that as a major task. And let me further explain, Madam President. So you have one lot belonging to the site of the previous ministry, and the current lot where the ministry is private property, and the other lot is the ministry, the government's daycare. So by acquiring that lot, that whole area is going to be all government. I don't see the wisdom in allowing some private entity to come between those two operations, the daycare, which is a very sensitive site, because if it's private property, you don't know what they'll come and do there. And then you have the ministry, the proposed ministry site. So I am strongly suggesting that the ministry consider acquiring that property, and so that that whole area can be a government compound. And so that will give leeway, leverage for the ministry and not restrict them in terms of what they want to build, how they want to orient the building, car parks and other facilities, other amenities, Madam President. So I offer this suggestion. Madam President, I do have some concerns regarding some policy decisions and projects that I must highlight, which I wish to indicate that this is not an attack on anyone. As I'm keenly aware, Madam President, how sensitive some of the ministry officials can be in Carriacou, you know. So I want to put on record publicly, this is not attacking anybody. It's just me as a Carriacouan being able, and based on my background, my competencies, to offer some advice and suggestions as how we can better improve what we do in Carriacou, Madam President. Madam President, the first is the main roadway to the main hospital, the better roadway. Madam President, some months ago, the ministry initiated work on the better main road. The challenge that I have with this project, Madam President, is that this is a multi-million-dollar project and it is being done via day work. I think this is non-productive. I think this is risky, and what it does, it also adds a longer duration for implementation, knowing that that is the main roadway to the Princess Royal Hospital. There are other roadways which Carriacouans know it's a little longer. It is not entirely as safer. We have had several accidents on that roadway, the 16 corner road. And the other area we can go to Bella is also a little bit longer. So while we do have alternative access, I believe for those reasons, in terms of implementing the project efficiently, cost-wise, I think I didn't see any line item for the Bella project in the estimates. So I presume that the same policy of day work may continue. So I raise this out of concern, Madam President. Madam President, I know this is something that, just to clear up, there was a pronouncement, some 2,000 feet of road was done in Pidimatnik. From the estimates, what was spent on roads in Pidimatnik was just a little over $200,000. Madam President, from my knowledge in terms of construction and estimates, $200,000 cannot build 2,000 feet of road. So I believe some clarification will come as regards to that. That might just be an error. So I just raise it just for clarity. Madam President, we have the Carriacou Farmers Association. I know that a lot of effort have gone into providing support for the festivals, but we have the Carriacou Farmers Association who allocations are made. We have not seen no movements in terms of working with them so that they can access these allocations. We have strengthened them to move whatever projects that they have going forward, Madam President. So I say this out of concern. But we raised a particular project that was raised by the AFL government on the other side, which is the solar PV battery project in Carriacou, Madam President. And you know, when member, Madam President, talk about we don't do this and we don't do that, and we're transparent and whatsoever, Madam President, I will give you a story about this project. Madam President, this is a very important project. I think all stakeholders know that. And I was happy to hear the Minister for the Environment speak highly of the project, not just what the project intends to do, but speak highly of the implementation and the quality of work that was done in implementing this project. And Madam President, you know, the person who won the contract, the subcontract for this project, is a Carriacouan. And efforts were made, Madam President, to take back the contract from that Carriacouan, all because he was a family member of mine. And that is a fact. Whatever see you want it to be. And that is a fact. But I'm happy to hear the Minister for the Environment, who is not acquainted with what transpired, speak highly that the project was implemented successfully on time and of a high quality. Madam President, it was done by Carriacouans, Madam President. Carriacouans did that, Madam President, installed that solar PV battery system. And I just wanted to put that on record, Madam President. Madam President, the low-income housing project in Dumfries. It was announced that there was some issue with the application process and persons were asked to reapply. Madam President, No reapplication took place. None. What took place? They took the same list, knock off a few people who they probably didn't like or suspect didn't vote them, and put in some people. That is what was done, Madam President, and that is the fact. And you know how, Madam President, I didn't say it, that is the policy. Madam President, that senior government official went on television and said, publicly admitted, that he is looking for his people only. He said it, the records are there, Madam President. And I hear that there's a lot of first time, this first time, Madam President, in the history of all parliamentary reps, I ever hear anybody go and say that you're representing all the people. First time I hear somebody say that they're only representing who vote for them. I never hear that yet. There's a first time for everything, Madam President. Madam President, termination of a number of persons. We understand that is the policy of the government. But we are not happy with it. Yeah, we are not happy with it. And I'll give you one example, Madam President. The only certified boxing coach in the state of Grenada, 3-star coach, was sent home. Was sent home. Represented Grenada nationally boxing. I mean, how embarrassing that could be. And we're talking about national appreciation and being proud, and we're going towards 50. Madam President, that is not right. Madam President, I just wanted to touch on one little thing before I close. There's something else, which I want to have a little fun with, Madam President. You know that there is a sign in Petit Matnik, Mark, I love Petit Matnik. Madam President, what? When this sign was installed, it's like it was a national emergency. Stories, news, this, that, sign, too much money. Madam President, the GTA now have a sign. Same type of sign, GTA have a sign. I don't know how much GTA pay for it. But Madam President, I'm appealing for Carrick to get this. So we need ours. I want this sign say, I love Carrick. Petit Matnik have, mainland have, time for Carrick to get. What we say? We share in the pie. That's all. We share in the pie. Madam President, I have another important plea. And this is a very serious one. You know, as a parent, never mind I look so young, Madam President, I do have a couple of kids, they say you have to start early so you can get your parents and grandparents to help you. So I was kind of wise in that regard. Madam President, Tam Sisi, we support, and I support, any support for students to be able to access education. And I think everybody here feel the same, Madam President. But as regards to the students who are enrolled in Tam Sisi on the St. George's campus, Madam President, from Carrick and Petit Matnik, more have to be done for them. More have to be done for them. Remember, their parents have to rent place. Madam President, I pay rent every month, so I know. More have to be done for them. I think that there's an opportunity to do a little extra for those persons so that parents can be able to meet those commitments. A number of students remain in Carrick because of their parents not being able to meet the expenses for them to come down to do some of the programs that are not offered in Carrick. So there is a hindrance to access in that regard. And I call on the government, the Minister for Education is here. I think he's going to put that on the top of the agenda because I know him. He's concerned about the well-being of students, and he will ensure that the students of Carrick and Petit Matnik get the fair share. The fair share of the pie. Let me use the correct word. The fair share of the pie. From a percentage allocation in terms of the financial challenges that they have to meet, Madam President. Madam President, I just want to touch on one quick issue before I close, Madam President, and that has to do with the lighting of playing fields. You know, I heard the Minister of Sport speak about lighting a playing field as if we lighting field as if it's Christmas. Something wrong in my head, Madam President. I don't know, it's me. Tell me what is wrong with lighting Springs playing field, Madam President. Tell me what is wrong with lighting Las Vegas playing field, the first playing field that you have night, you could play night cricket in Grenada. What is wrong about that? Madam President, it looks like my time is up. I just want to close. I'll be very obedient, Madam President. I wish to conclude and carry on with the Matnik on a most somber note, Madam President, that this year has been a tough and painful year, very emotional year for a number of families, for both islands, Carriacou and Matnik, Madam President. We have lost many loved ones, more than normal, which is a present experience that is impacting all of us. Madam President, it has also hit home for me and my family as well, Madam President. Sadly, I too lost my wife to cancer in April of this year. So I can relate, Madam President, the challenges, the pains of the other families and what they are going through at this time. But Madam President, the most I can do is to offer best wishes for this holiday season, for this Christmas season, as we all try to recover and to heal by the grace of God. Thank you very much, Madam President.
I thank the Minister, I thank the Senator from Carriacou and Matnik, and I just wanted to consult with you before we proceed. I think Senator David Andrew, you're getting ready to speak next.